Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. As always, I'm Nathan. This is Lisa, and we are the podcast where excuses come to die, discipline is built, and lives are changed. Here we are all about transformation. So you can take action. You don't just listen to what is said, but you actually apply it to your life. You bring it in, you make some change, you become successful, and you help the world become a better place. So that, Lisa, hopefully was a little bit shorter. Hopefully my voice didn't go up a couple of octaves, but I'm working on some things behind the scenes here as we test out new intros. But today, as we were just talking off camera, there was a topic that I wanted to discuss, and this actually came from a comedy that Bree and I oftentimes watch, which is called Platonic. So I'm totally going to plug the show. I wish they paid me to plug the show, but if you don't watch it, it is fucking hilarious. You need to watch it because it is amazing. It's with Seth Rogen, and I think her name is Rose Bryn. But it's comedy gold. Anyways, this last episode that they pushed out, the topic was don't ask, don't get. And they made a spoof of it. Obviously it's a comedy, but the whole point was, Rose is trying to set up this office party. And they are talking about, she doesn't know how to do it. And one of her friends just says, like, if you don't ask, don't get. And like, it's this like little quippy statement that everybody in the school that this woman works for started to take on. And it became the theme. And so they start asking and start getting. But, as much a comedy as it actually is, it's actually a really true statement in life. And I have found over the last, what I would say is specifically probably 5 years, 3 of those, I didn't really ask for anything. It was like, I'm going to do this myself. As you and I both know, it takes a village to do anything in life, to raise a family, a career, to start a business. And so I wanted to talk about that today because I think if you don't ask, you don't get.
Love how you brought all this together. I'm impressed. Good job. And I'm a big proponent of this too. And it's something that I've learned later in life, but I'm trying to teach my kids as they're younger because it is so true. And it's not necessarily something tangible that you always get, but there are sometimes like just gestures or actions that other people can take that can open doors, or even just, I throw into that bucket asking for feedback or asking for advice, because sometimes it takes just asking someone else's thoughts on something that you've been struggling with to get to the next breakthrough. So as you and I talk about this phrase, it's not just, if I ask for money, I'm going to get money. It's so much bigger than that. And especially when it comes to personal development, trying to reach your goals and see what that next step holds for someone.
No, but I think that's a really important distinction because, when people ask, they feel like they have to get something, or every time it's going to be an immediate yes or an immediate no. A couple of sessions ago, as an example, we talked about we basically talked about being proactive. And I think about like, don't ask, don't get in a proactive sense. Like I meet with somebody, I will say, hey, I'd love this to happen. Can I take you out for coffee? Like you're asking for really somebody's feedback, somebody's time. They may or may not be able to give it to you. There was a gentleman that is a pretty prominent personal coach that we're actually going to have on the podcast here in late October. I'm happy to meet him. One of his friends is actually his client. He's not a coach of mine, but I went up to him after and I said, hey, you're a really great speaker. I'd love to have you on the podcast again. And didn't ask, I wouldn't have gotten that. But now we actually have somebody who is a lot of value, a lot of impact coming out of the podcast coming up in a few months. And so I like to point that out because there's different ways to think about this. I think how people frame the actual statement of don't ask, don't get is really important. And when you frame it always in like, I need this thing, and if I ask just for this one thing and they reject it, it's all over. But there's so many different applications across life that you can use that statement and be proactive to get things, to help yourself, to help other people, because it's not always about you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people get tripped up on this concept for a couple of reasons, and tripped up not in that they can't ask, but they feel like they shouldn't ask. And I think one of them is the fear of no happening, to the last point that you just made, which is something that happens in your mind and generally tends to not be true. It's usually yes, or I can't do that, but I can do this, or yes, but I can't do it right now. Here's when I could do it for you. It's very rarely a hard no. And then the other thing that I think people get tripped up on is they feel like they have nothing to give back, especially when it comes to asking from someone that is further down the road than you. Someone may feel like, I have nothing to offer this person, therefore I feel bad asking. And that is also a mindset shift that from maybe, I don't know what I could offer to somebody,
Mhm.
right now, or I don't have anything to offer yet.
Mhm.
Or maybe this person would help me because they are farther down the journey and they want to give back. And if I don't ask, they may never have that opportunity. And so I think reframing our mindset around being afraid of no and feeling like we don't have anything to offer somebody else in an even exchange are two big reasons that people just never take that step to ask.
Yeah, I love how you actually framed that, because when you position it in of like, let's go back to 2 or 3 podcasts ago. We talked about creating a habit of making the journey possible. It's not always about the destination. You want the end goal, but it's about being able to take those first steps. So case in point, Bree works for a medium-sized company. I think they have, 1,000 to 2,000 employees. Their SVP is stepping away. He's going to go out and spend some time with his family. And so in this public setting, he said, anybody who wants to connect with me, I'm willing to make it happen. Get in touch with my EA. How many people do you think actually did that?
Maybe 2 or 3.
Exactly. Well, my wife happened to be one of them,
Of course she
which
is.
was great, right? And she brought it up, and I was like, absolutely do it. And here's why. Nobody will actually do it. And so sometimes we're also given the cues. And it wasn't that she's trying to get something out of it, but her logic was, hey, I at least want to know, what did it take for him to be successful in this role? He's this senior vice president of this big company, multi hundreds of billions of dollars, several $billion, in revenue a year. He's, been part of this startup. He was a founding member, whatever it was. I want to know what his logic is. How can I increase my presence, increase my networking within the organization? What is the organization actually looking for? And so it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to ask for something here. Your ask is, I'm going to set up this time. My ask is, I'm going to ask you to spend a little bit of time with me so that I can prep and get some information for you and take the next steps, which is going to help my career, which is going to help my relationships, which is going
Yes.
to help my financial situation.
Yeah. I actually had a reverse of this yesterday. Um, I'm hiring for a role. I had closed the position, wasn't taking any more true interviews, and had something scheduled on the calendar. And so out of respect, I emailed an individual and said, hey, I'm sorry, I've got an offer out. The position is essentially closed. And he said, would you be willing to connect with me? And I said, well, yeah, of course. So we had this entire conversation, and his background didn't necessarily fit the role that I was looking for. But in that conversation, he did just what you were saying. He's like, here's my experience. Here's where I'm trying to get to. What would you suggest I do to help fill some of these gaps? And over the course of 25 minutes, we talked through different ideas. And I said, why don't you connect with this person? I can make an introduction to this person because they can provide more information. And if he hadn't asked, that would have been, yep, thank you for your time. Good luck on your journey. But out of that, not only did he get some ideas for me and what it might take to become a part of a team like mine, but also he got another connection that then will also give him more information, which can probably lead to another connection or opportunity down the road. So it's not even just when I go to this person and I do an ask and that's the end of the conversation. More often than not, that's a door that leads to a whole slew of other doors that are eventually open for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I want to keep pulling on this because you just reminded me of another perfect example, which I'll get to in a second. But oftentimes it's difficult for people to remember they're stuck in their own rut, right? We all have our own version of reality. We all see things from our own lens, whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. It just is what it is, right? You perceive this conversation differently than I do, as an example. And sometimes we forget that just because we see things a certain way, we assume the other person sees it in the same way. And that's not necessarily true. And I think most people are willing to help. Most people are willing to take a chance. And especially if you're in the right environment, let's take whether it's corporate, whether it's a small business or other type of work environment, people want to help. They want to see their employees grow. They want to have that empowerment and give employees to make the right and sometimes the wrong decisions. We had a gentleman on the podcast yesterday named Mitch Smedley, who runs a big plumbing company outside of Kansas City. And at the end of the podcast, we were talking a little bit about failures, but also how do you grow a culture? And one of the things that he talked about was he empowers his employees to bring him things that they want to do. So they approached him and said, hey, we want to buy this $2,000 tool. And his point was, I'm willing to buy this tool for you, but you've got to figure out, you've got to go sell this type of job so that we can use this piece of equipment. And he said that they did it and they were like, great, we'll do it. They got the tool. They went out to the first job and they broke the tool. And they were like, Mitch is going to be so mad. Like, he spent all this money. Like, we didn't even get through the job and it's already broken and all these things. And he went to the job site and he turned it around. And he was like, this is great. Now we know how to not use the tool. But it expanded an entire revenue stream for that business because those employees went to him and said, hey, here's an idea. We want to use this. Let's go ahead, purchase the tool. Got to sell him on it, right? We got to show him that we
got to put in some
use
work.
it, right? But that's a stepping stone of how things can really be expanded when you're not in charge, but you're also saying, hey, I think we should do something like this. It's an ask so that you can potentially be empowered to go do greater things for the company as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that story, it made me think of one other thing that I think is really important, especially when people are approaching others that are further down the road than they are. And it's not just the ask, but why the ask is important or what comes behind the ask or what you're willing to put in. And I think I'll use me for another example. I've had plenty of conversations about mapping out 5 years down the road and, what my goals are, how do I get there? And so if I just go to my mentor and say, what do I need to do in 5 years to be X, Y, and Z? It's probably going to be like, well, I don't know, like, what are you doing now? And why does it matter to me? Versus when I frame the conversation that in a way that says, in 5 years, I want to be doing X. I'm actively working on a development plan and I've mapped out these milestones. I would love your feedback on one, if you think my skills and experience match where I'm trying to go, but where I could accelerate or we could find mutual benefit in additional connections or activities that could get me to my goal. Now they understand where I'm going, and why I'm asking the question. And also that I've put in the effort ahead of the ask to be well thought out. And I think that's really important because a lot of people just kind of throw off an ask like, hey, I want this, without really thinking it through and putting in the work ahead of the conversation.
I love it. I'm so happy you brought that up because I was going to bring this up truly because I was going to bring it up because a lot of people will ask for something. They'll put no effort into the thought ahead of time. It's just like, I want this, but then they don't really even know what to do if they get that information or if they get that time from somebody. And so I was going to make a point, you did this much more eloquently, but I was going to make the point of like, sometimes it forces the conversation, even if you're not ready, but you're like, man, I should really do this thing because the opportunity is here. Let's go back to the example of Bree sitting down with her SVP. He put the opportunity out there. She made the ask. I'm going to get some time. She got some time on his calendar. And then she came to me like a day later and was like, I don't even know what I'm going to ask this guy. And that was okay because she secured the time. She had a little bit of time to think it through, but it forced her to then sit down and say, okay, I have the attention of this person. I originally knew kind of the direction I wanted to go. Now, how can I structure this a little bit better? And she sat down and she prepped and she spent probably 30 minutes or an hour writing out questions. Hey, this is important to me. How do I go here? I see the company doing this. Why does this really matter? I want to get into leadership. Why, what does this company really look for in leadership qualities that I can start working towards? And so she took exactly what you're saying. She put the prep work into it, but then it becomes a really constructive conversation. Yeah. And what you did, which I really like, is you said you even sent it to them ahead of time. Right. And so when we sit down with people for podcasts, as an example, I tell them, here's the topic I would like to focus on. Once people buy off on the topic, we send them preliminary questions. And I say, we may not go through all these questions. They're not going to be the only questions, but they're going to kick us off so that we can really start to get the conversation flowing. You understand kind of the train of thought that just helps people get in the mindset. They're not caught off guard.
Yes.
And there's nothing worse than feeling, on the flip side, there's nothing worse than having you feel like your time is being disrespected. When somebody says, I want to sit down with you, and then they just show up and you're like, what do you want to talk about? They're like, I don't know. I just kind of want to have coffee and like be in your presence.
Yeah,
and you're like,
100%.
I don't. Yeah. So, it's also a respect. When you start to take those initial steps, it forces you to make some of those different decisions. So you, quite frankly, don't embarrass yourself and use your time and the other person's time wisely.
Well, and I think, yes, for sure. And I think the other side is, yes, the person doesn't want their time to be wasted. But one thing that I have noticed about very successful people and people that are high performers and they are driven is they want to provide value. And so if you don't come prepared, it almost leaves them feeling like they couldn't be prepared and they couldn't have offered the value or the advice to the greatest extent that they could have, because they're approaching it on the fly just like you are. And I think for me, that's what bothers me the most is I really want to help you. I'm genuinely interested in helping you move forward. Any information you can give me ahead of time allows me to think about my network, think about opportunities, so that I can come to the conversation prepared with a couple of things that might match what I know you're going to ask about.
Yeah, that's great. That's another good point. You're just dropping bombs all
Mic
over.
drop.
And let's just touch on that, kind of round this out. I know we're getting a little long for our weekly sessions here, but we have a person in our we have a person in our personal lives that guards their time very closely. There's not a lot of explanation. There's not a lot of like, here's my availability, but you have to ask to try to get on the calendar. Most of the time, this person will do that. However, like there is the occasional, nope, not going to happen. Or I'll get an email, hey, I need an agenda before we sit down. And that used to really rub me the wrong way because I'm like, you're not that important. You're not busy. I know your life, right? Like, why should I have to? But it actually helps guide the conversation. And so that is really important. It is a actual sign of respect from both sides. One, it shows that you're valuing the time. Two, it shows you're going to use the time constructively. And then three, there is forethought. So both parties come to the table prepared. And so I want to highlight this because I think your point is really, really good. And it's not talked about that often. Oftentimes we'll put opportunities out. Hey, I'm willing to sit down and do this with you, but then they don't ask the next question. What are we going to be talking about? Give me an agenda of the points that you want to do. That's a 30-second thought process or text type or whatever it is that you can put down, but it will also help you lead the other person who has put time on your calendar so they are proactively thinking. So it's always a two-way street. And I just wanted to highlight that because we're coming at this for the most part of this conversation as the asker. But when
Right.
somebody asks you, you can also do a lot to help them prepare and to make sure that you are creating the most amount of value in that time possible for that other person.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think this was a very, very helpful conversation and one that clearly I use almost daily on both sides. So I think it will help a lot of people. And also, especially as we talked about earlier in the week, getting some momentum building towards the end of the year. So now is the time to think about where you want to go. Who do you need to connect with and the asks that you might want to make so that you are ending 2025 with the most momentum under your belt to begin the new year.
Love that. Yes. If you like this episode, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below, tell us what you're asking about, and let us know how we can help you because that's what we're here for. Again, we're here to transform some lives. We want you to be able to apply this information to your own life and go out and make a big impact. So with that, Lisa, we will be talking tomorrow. So I'll see you soon.
Yeah, we are. Bye-bye.